Wellington's my home. It's a city stolen from the sea. It sits on the edge, and the waterfront walks along that edge. It's a boundary line, a frontier between land and water, between city and sea, between culture and nature. And scattered along this walkway, you can stumble across some strange markers, words cut from metal and stamped in stone, poems that negotiate this boundary, and at the same time give us a glimpse into our place, our world, and ourselves. Poems have this power. Certainly, award-winning poet Glenn Colquhoun thinks so. Poetry has given Glenn a unique voice. It's enabled him to speak with disarming clarity of landscape, the hearts of people, his work as a doctor, and his passion for spirit.
From the moment I can remember being conscious, I've loved stories, and I think poetry is an outgrowth of that. But I didn't, and many times in my life I tried to write, and wrote furtively and put it away. But it was probably my late 20s when I started to write in a regular way, in a consistent way, and went on to publish stuff. And my career began, I guess, in my late 20s, early 30s.
Yeah, and you've become a celebrated poet.
Yeah, well, I'm not.
You have.
My sisters don't celebrate me. My daughter doesn't celebrate me. But occasionally someone likes a poem, and that's nice.
Yeah. What is it about poetry? Because, some people get it, and some people don't get it at all. Someone was saying to me yesterday, you write poetry by writing a sentence and just putting some returns in and a couple of capitals here and there.
For me. I think everyone gets it, and if they don't, it's the wrong poem for them, or then they haven't quite walked around the poem enough to find the secret door.
You've written a book of poems about making sense of poems, explaining them.
To my mum and to my dad, who made me good and made me bad. An explanation of poetry to my father. Because I came from a family that was in no way poetic or really even very literary. Dad read the Sunday news,
right,
and I loved the Sunday news. And unashamedly, some of my poetry is very tabloid, cartoony poetry. It's probably hopelessly influenced by the Sunday news. When I think just made that association.
Maybe that's why you've become a celebrated poet.
Exactly. I've even got a poem called The Page 3 Girl. I wanted to say to my family, more than just my dad, I guess Dad was an image for the area I grew up in, to say it's no different from when you're building or when you're doing this, with that sense of release, that sense of insight, that snap of before and after, of gaining insight into a painting, a picture, a piece of music, a game of sport.
Dick the electrician fell asleep when he found no car chase in her script. Later the word was a barmaid. Vic, the bricklayer, made off with her as though she was a Sunday paper tucked firmly beneath his arm. At last the word appeared as naked as a poem. Mum found her hiding underneath my mattress. I said, heavens. She said, hell. You said, Jesus, Mary and Joseph. And all Jeff, the plumber, ever said was God.
I grew up in a very religious context in the Seventh Day Adventist Church, and that colours all my work. Lots of images are drawn from the Bible. It was my first great base of story, much more than the great classics of English literature. It's the Bible and 70s television and the Sunday news, Hogan's Heroes, and the page 3 girl and Jonah and the whale.
Right.
That's
a great mix, isn't it?
Explains my poetry, really, I think. I've written a lot about the cultural coastline, you know.
What is it that you mean by that?
I guess that boundary where Pakeha and Māori meet.
Right.
I find that invigorating, okay?
Right.
Sometimes I can dip right into the Māori world and swim in that sea. Sometimes I can swim in the Pakeha Sea, but the coastline's where I love to be.
Right.
And I think mostly where I have to be. I grew up in South Auckland, so I didn't grow up in an area where being Pakeha was a dominant culture, even though it was a majority culture at that point. It, you know, in lots of ways it wasn't dominant, so there were many other voices at the table. But also I went to Northland, you know, about the same time I started to write poetry, and fell in love with a little place called Te Tirohanga Mutungo Krei Manganui ki Tana Tuahine, which is too long to say.
It's quite a lot shorter.
And that has been a muse for me. The community, the people there, the landscape. And because it happens to be Māori who live there, in some ways I've written about those things, but in some ways I think the older and uglier I get, I'm just in love with that place, you know, and its people.
So does that become a kind of an image of belonging for you?
It forces me to ask myself, who am I as Pakeha? How do I relate to some of these things around me? I did my OE in New Zealand, you know, I went and lived in a completely different culture, one of 3 white people who lived there. So it can't help but force me to say, what are my stories? And I think it has made me more Pakeha, not less Pakeha, that context. It's made me say, how do I find that old tribalism? And spirituality is part of that, but it's part of the old tribal, long deadened down self that was part of my, you know, mongrel dog heritage.
Your family had been members of the Seventh Day Adventist Church for generations.
Yeah, my grandparents or great-grandparents on both sides were converted in the old-time sort of tent meetings, you know. Missionaries came over, I think American, and yeah, my family signed up.
What are the distinctive tenets of
Seventh Day
Adventism?
We go to church on Saturday.
That's distinctive, yeah.
We're Advent, so that's the Seventh Day, but we're Adventist. I say we're, even though I've left the church, but you know, I guess it's like being Catholic. You sort of culturally
can't scrub it out.
Absolutely. Nor do I choose to scrub that bit out anymore. Adventist because Adventists believe in the second Advent. They believe that Christ will come again at the end of days and take the righteous to heaven. And you fellas are going to burn.
The rest of us are in deep trouble.
Big trouble, Chris.
That's right.
Yeah.
Okay, is that happening anytime soon?
Well, that's the great art of judging, isn't it? It's just to go over to the winning side at the last moment.
Was it strict? I mean, were you...
There were some families that were enormously strict, and but I think, my family, they had a quiet, solid faith, but they weren't lunatic about it. I only knew a handful of people till I was 25 who weren't Adventists.
Right.
So there's the other thing about Adventism, it's cradle to the grave. I went to Adventist schools, there's Adventist hospitals, there's a strong health message in Adventism. They are Sanitarium health food company.
I was going to say, that's the one people know, perhaps.
Your Wheat Bix, your cornflakes. Kellogg was a Adventist.
Okay.
There was a split, so we've got all the bases covered. But he left the church. He's a bit frowned on Kellogg's. You eat Kellogg's cornflakes.
So Sanitarium's still an Adventist-run company?
Yep. So I went to Adventist primary school, Adventist high school, then I went to work for the Sanitarium. Wow. Then I went to train to be a minister. Because if you're good at words in the church, you don't become a poet. You become a minister. To be an Adventist minister, you train in a theological college in Australia. So I went there for 2 years, and I had the best time. You know, it was a boarding college in a sense, so all the great things about leaving home and going and staying with lots of young people your own age, it was marvellous. But I got into heaps of trouble because in my context in Papatoe Church in a Polynesian Auckland, you could say and act particular ways. People would get it.
Yeah.
But in Australia, they didn't get it at all, and I got in a heap of trouble. And they asked me to reconsider my calling. Yeah, they said, could you please? And that's the way you would put it in Adventism. Don't come back next year. Take the time
Spend some time
reconsidering your calling, which I'm still doing. I'll be back. You know, you'll be sorry. Yeah, I felt hugely victimised and misunderstood because I was a good kid.
Right.
Yeah.
You didn't come back on your own?
No, I came back with a young woman who had just graduated from the college as an English teacher.
Right.
And we had fallen in love, and we were together for the next 10 years.
Right.
And she became the fulcrum around which my spirituality changed. And, you know, it's like a long narrative being an Adventist. You're just, are you sure this happened? You sure we should think like this? We'll try and stitch it up, but every time you did it, it would become more frayed, and there would be pat answers, but they wouldn't be quite satisfying. And so you keep wanting to fix the broken bit of Adventism, the bit that doesn't quite sync with what you see in the rest of the world. And that narrative force drove me, and then Barbara, my wife, that relationship broke me in the end and split me open. And I think when you get to that point, when you're splayed and you're nailed to your own personal cross, you've got to find something that works. But she took me up, she took me down, and made me find a place for the way I believed.
Right.
And it's the reason I wrote a whole book of poetry to her, you know. She was my holy day. That day my city was built. That day I robbed the natives blind and threw a generation of my finest to death for a ridiculous war. She was that day I walked with Jesus down the street and knocked him blow by blow into the wood. And so that was it. That was my being nailed to the cross. And I think most people's journeys have that sort of point. That's the fulcrum. And everything else is detail. And I learnt from that to stay broken, you know.
But being broken is a redemptive experience.
Oh, yeah. I learnt that line, there is wonderful, spectacular life and all sorts of gods on the forest floor. And rotting is the most wonderful, gorgeous, protracted experience.
Stump. There is something about the way you lie, content, in water, that reminds me how fortunate it is to fail in one's objective.
If you're going to be an effective church, you want people who are worried about the fraying at the edges. You want people who are creative and are doubters, natural doubters. And I am a natural doubter. And I bent myself for 25 years into being a believer. I can be arrogant enough to say the sad thing for my church, whom I adore, they're my people, is that I don't fit there.
That's right.
Because I keep doubting.
They've lost the benefit of that doubt.
I'm exactly what they need. And I need their community. But they keep the believers. And for me, releases come from doubt, from failure, from being broken. Whenever I start to get fixed, I get highly suspicious of what I'll come out with next. I just cannot but trust a fixed person. Truly, they're the most dangerous people. It's our politicians out there. Everybody's fixed. Everybody's got an answer. They're the most dangerous people.
So
They
if
don't.
someone's got an answer, actually, they're not asking the right questions.
Yeah, it's sort of, why can't we say I don't know? But I'll try this, or this is what I think. I hunt for the spiritual experience, because I know few things that are as exhilarating or as more life-affirming. And for me, the spiritual experience is that experience of feeling deeply connected to another human being, to the inanimate object, to a set of experiences, to a creative moment, which often is a moment of deep connection anyway. But I go out searching for that. And I relate to churches in the same way as the mad bearded prospector in central Otago who hasn't been heard of for 30 years is still panning for gold, as opposed to working for the bank.
So the church is like the bank and you're the prospector.
In a sense.
Yeah.
And my gold will be different,
Yep.
And I have a few nuggets here and a few nuggets there, but I love the rugged independence now after being told or expected what to think for so long. I love just wandering and put that away. And it might be in a poem, it might be a patient I've seen, it might be another experience. These are the places I most commonly find these experiences.
Sky. Here, there, joy, fear, peak, spear, the sky decides. Road, bear, cave, lair, sullen, fair, the sky decides. The sky decides.
I just wonder about the language, because there are generations now, baby boomers, Gen X, Gen Y, whatever, who haven't had that socialisation that you've had,
Sure.
Many of whom have had the same experiences, though they won't name them in the same way because they don't have access to the same vocabulary.
Sure.
But that spirituality presumably is still there for them.
Yeah. Again, just like we talked at the beginning about poetry, not everyone likes it. It's the same with spirituality. Everyone is spiritual, It's sort of like saying some people never get hungry, or, it just doesn't happen. People are spiritual. They just
By
call
nature.
it. Yeah, they just call it something different. I think you see it in medicine everywhere, but particularly in general practice, which is very much, for some of the day, like taking confession and listening to people struggle for a vocabulary to make sense of where they're at. I wanted to catch up with you after you'd had your fall off the ladder and see how you're going. People come a little bit broken and you have a chance to be in the zone of compassion. It's like they wear compassion around them and you swim into their sea, and you can be soft and you can be open and you can bring your broken bits to their broken bits and you can connect. And that's very different from saying, I will give you something to make you better.
And how's everything else going?
Good.
Good? Yeah, what's happening with the garden?
Well, I'm into it now.
One of the really big steps for me was shifting God out of being a personage, an identity as a character,
Right.
personality, and into being fractured through everybody you meet.
So what's going into the garden now? Forgive me, I'm a big disappointment to
Just
my
pull out
mum.
over here, I'm just going to put spuds in and silver bee too.
Good for spuds now.
I spent many years trying to believe in a God that was a figurehead.
This is the old man in the sky
The
kind of
old
number.
man in the sky God. Until I realised I just couldn't, and I never met anybody by then who could convince me. And I realised that actually that's because nobody can. Nobody knows. Everybody finds an island of belief that they can live on. And I thought, I'm not going to do that anymore. I've spent 25 years banging my head against a brick wall. I see God as a manifestation of people, of our individual and collective desire for him. And so therefore the things and the attributes of God are attributes of human beings, and I have never seen a goodness nor an evil on the face of the earth yet, and I'm open to it.
Yeah.
That can't be explained by the actions of men and women, by people.
We'll give it a week, yeah, and then we'll have a powwow.
The best consultations have been the ones that have challenged me, that have made me practice differently, that have said you're actually wrong about what you think about me, which is where I go to church now. Not always, but it's the closest I do.
Sorry? Yeah, I'll put you in the garden.
I get to see God 20 times a day now. I see him, you know, a 17-year-old boy who's fractured his metacarpal, you know, punching somebody on a Saturday night, or cut his arm from putting it through a window because he was angry, or a you know, 16-year-old who's pregnant and wanting a termination, or a 3-year-old who's got a runny nose and a sore ear, or an 80-year-old with a, you know, who's facing not being able to cope at home anymore. All sorts and shapes and forms, and it's magnificent. And I can't always be sentient enough and organised enough to take the time to see it, but at least once a day you just think, this is God talking, and that I can believe in.
Along the beach, and we all was sitting in our vehicle. I said, from here to that house you see out there is 200 metres. Well, this is where the sand dunes were here. But now, the Tangaroa's coming in to take all that land now. See, God is coming to get, because where can he go? Because everyone's building on him.
I work as a GP 3 days a week for an iwi health provider in Paraparaumu, Tiatiawa ki Whakarongotai, that part of Tiatiawa that came down from Taranaki and settled around the Waikanai area. So it's largely urban Māori practice, really.
How was your trip to Pātaka?
Good.
I'm surprised they let you come back. Some of you might be relics. You could have stayed in there. I thought,
You want me to bash him down?
I have to go in to see I have to go and see Tūmeki and Pātaka in the museum from now on.
Don't be naughty.
It's a wonderful practice. It's brilliantly run and neat patients, and I enjoy it very much. A fantastic group of colleagues that I work with, and it keeps me on the coastline. You know, the cultural
coastline.
Cultural and physical coastline. I live further up the coast at a little place called Waikawa Beach, because when I got here I just drove everywhere till I found something that reminded me of Northland, and I always reassure myself that I can go onto the beach and walk north and I'll end up in Hokianga, and that's a lovely place to be, far from the madding crowd, you know.
Can you climb up here?
And look after my daughter the back end of the week.
You right? Hold on, stand up straight.
And I write the other half of the week. So between medicine, writing, and my daughter, I have my week, and I call them the Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost. I'm not sure which is which, but it's the Trinity, and yeah, it's good. Each of them are sufficiently different to take me away from the others quite a bit.
Your daughter is growing up. What kind of spiritual nurture do you offer and wish for her?
Really good question. I don't know. I think to grow up knowing that she is fully Maori and fully Pakeha, to love both those cultures, to have them in her, to have the gods of both, the spiritualities of both cultures, to be open to many different spiritualities, and to have the confidence one day to choose her own and challenge me. But for her to be secure and loved, to have the context to do that within. I was loved by the church. There was a wonderful community. And I think I feel that synchronicity when I'm up at Te Tii, because I grew up in such a tribal way in Adventism, and I want that for her, you know. I want that sense of aroha, and not to be too quick to figure it out, and to say to her lots of time, I was wrong, I don't know, sorry. I think, you know, spirituality is a journey, if you're lucky, or should be. So you shouldn't really know everything. This is where I've been panning so far, Chris.
That's right.
this one. I feel like landscapes in the pan, you know. I feel like it's separating out and I'm trying to get an angle on it. All I know is when I left Te Tii to go live down the Kapiti coast, I ached for her. And I didn't just ache for the people, I ached for the inanimate landscape shape of her. And then that morphed into an ache for lots of different landscapes that I had no right to ache for. Right. I can understand aching for Te Tii, but it's like that thing set off the ache. And then all of a sudden I saw the earth, and you see shape in the world. You see landscape as something that can be ached for.
It's triggered an awakening in you.
And maybe it's a function of age. Maybe as we get older, there's just something about permanence that seems more important to us.
Yeah.
You know? I don't know, but I like all those things to play with. And so it feels like a furtive new place to take a spirituality.
2 ducks. Businessmen. Meres. Fat lovers. Statements to make. Appearances to forget the deep. How reasonable to float upon the surface.
My small church is a boat for me and maybe my best mate in England.
Right.
And we float in it and catch the odd snapper, get a bit of gold, and we watch you buggers go past in the Queen Mary. Not for me, thank you very much.
You're happy in the This program was made with funding from New Zealand On Air.